It's time for another edition of the Improbability Engine. I'm Will Aubrey with my buddy Joe Darnell. And Joe, we start as always with our moment of what? And I have a literal moment of what today.
Okay.
Yesterday, we were on our way to Kroger, and we were heading down 16th Street beside the intramural fields.
Okay.
And we get down nearly to the end, and my wife says, there was a girl tightrope walking back there. And I said, what? She said, yeah, there was a girl tightrope walking back there. Let's turn around. And she said, okay. And so she turns around and we go back. And there's a girl at one of the houses who has taken a strap, like the kind that you might, I don't know, use to hold something in your truck.
Right. Or pull a vehicle with.
Or, yeah, maybe.
Maybe.
It's a strap that's flat that she has tied between two trees, and she's walking it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, go up here and park. And we walk down and walk across the street, and I say to her, you're amazing. And she laughs, and she thinks that's kind of cool. And she gestures to this other girl who's on the front porch, and she said, she can do it backwards. And I'm like, seriously? And so she comes out, and she proceeds to walk one way and then walk backwards the other way. And it was just incredible. And I made a video of it, and I put it on Facebook. But it was literally a what?
Well,
moment.
I will tell you, that is actually called slack rope walking, because it's not pulled too tight, but it is tight enough for you to stand on. And it was a fad not too long ago that I saw a few times on campus. And you're right. It's one of those things where you watch somebody do that and you just kind of go, what gave you the idea?
Well, I'm just amazed at their balance that they can actually do that. It's all I can do to stand up on the ground.
When I was in school, when I was at Murray State, there were a lot of people riding unicycles. And they rode them to class. They rode unicycles to class. And we're not talking about your standard, regular old unicycle. Some of these were like 5 and 6 feet tall.
Oh, good Lord.
And I watched a guy come. I used to work at the housing office, and he came into the housing office and he dropped off some paperwork as is normal and customary. And I watched him mount his 6 foot tall unicycle and ride it across campus. And it left me dumbfounded, mainly because I don't think there are any advantages to riding a unicycle. I can't think of any.
Neither can I.
So, that is what it is. Fads are interesting, and especially if you're good at something that's pretty difficult, because I would hurt myself trying to walk that strap. I would hurt myself. I would fall and break something. I know this about me.
I wouldn't hurt myself only because I would be too bad at it to actually be able to get up there. It's kind of like one time years ago when I played a lot of basketball and I was still pretty good, but I was never quick. There was this guy that I was playing against, and he faked a pass. You know, he's dribbling, fakes a pass, and keeps dribbling. And he asked me after the play, he said, how did you not go for that? And I said, my reactions are too slow. It was over before I had a chance to react.
I used to do the same thing. People were like, man, you never fall for a crossover. It's like, because I'm not good enough at defense to fall for it. You have to be good enough. It's like, I would never get dunked on. I would never, ever, ever get dunked on. And the reason being, I can't jump high enough, and I know I'm not going to get it, so I just stay out of the way. I'm not going to get hurt. It's not that I'm knowledgeable and know that, oh yeah, I'm not going to get dunked on. It's that I know that there is no positive that I have there, so I'm just not going to get in the way. Same concept. All right, so my moment of what? Recently in the news, I've been hearing certain technophiles like Elon Musk, the Tesla CEO, and others talk about artificial intelligence being the gravest threat for all humanity. With that in mind, I saw this news posting. A company who had a large building hired a robot to do security for them. It was to patrol the bottom level and to make sure that nothing was wrong in Washington, D.C. And it was working fine right up until the point that it drove itself into the fountain into the middle of the office entrance, causing it to no longer be operational. It was at that point that I became slightly less concerned about the dangers of artificial intelligence. All you have to do, put a fountain somewhere.
Well, I've, dealt with a lot of these so-called smart computers that claim that they can understand English. I recently I called customer service somewhere, and the computer actually said, you can use complete sentences when talking to me, like it was proud.
Yeah.
And so I tried using complete sentences. It quickly became clear all it was doing was listening for keywords.
Right.
It did not understand English. I've yet to see a computer that really understood English. And until they can come up with a computer that can actually understand English instead of listening for keywords, I'm not going to worry about them.
I say the same thing about freshmen in college. The minute they start understanding English and not just listening for keywords, that's the minute I start getting nervous.
Today, we're going to talk about football in the state of Kentucky. And that might seem like an oxymoron to some people. Because it's not exactly the sport in the state of Kentucky. And yet, we do have several schools that play football on one level or another. I think that if you look at football in the state of Kentucky prior to the University of Louisville becoming prominent in the 90s, you would have to look to the schools that are now considered 1AA for any hint of excellence. Kentucky had a year or two here or there where they had good teams, but
especially late 70s, early 80s, there were a couple years.
They had a couple of years. Yeah. They had a year or two.
And I'm not saying like the whole stretch from the late 70s.
Right.
I'm saying like there was a couple years inside that
sandwiched between
some
losing
really
seasons.
mediocre, not great seasons.
And they had a year in the 80s when they were really good. But most years they had losing records.
Right.
If you wanted excellence, you looked to the 1AA level, and at that level, Murray State, Eastern Kentucky, Western Kentucky, those schools fielded good teams.
Right.
And
even Morehead State, for a very, very brief period of time, were relevant.
Then Howard Schnellenberger came to the University of Louisville. And when he came to Louisville, he said that the program was on a collision course with the national championship. And he was ridiculed for it. And they haven't won a national championship, but they've reached a level where it's not crazy to think about that as a possibility. One thing that I always liked about Schnellenberger was that when he came to U of L, I remember his first season, I believe it was, they got beat 49-0 by Wyoming, and a reporter asked him, do you feel like they ran the score up? And he said, no, it's not their job to keep themselves from scoring. That's our job.
Right.
And I always admired that. And he led Louisville to a victory over Alabama in the Fiesta Bowl, where they just essentially beat the snot out of Alabama.
Right.
And then here more recently in the 2000s, under the direction of first John L. Smith and then Bobby Petrino a couple of times, Louisville's actually managed to become nationally relevant. They had a Heisman Trophy winner on the team last year.
Yep.
And when you consider where the program was in the 70s, where, they would lose to Wichita State, and they actually lost to Murray State one year.
State, yeah.
If you consider where the program was to where it has come, it's incredible, and I do think that it is the top program in the state.
As of right now, that's probably the case. I think there's a little bit of fool's gold, though, when you look at Louisville and their success. They don't play in one of the more dominant leagues in
Yes, they do.
football. No, they don't.
The
No,
ACC was
don't.
ranked by the Sagarin ratings as the top league in the country last year.
They do not play in one of the top leagues in the country.
You're just wrong.
I disagree with the Sagarin ratings, and I'll stand by it. Whenever
But the
you
Sagarin
look at,
ratings are based on fact. You have your opinion.
when you look at their conference, and the best teams are teams that are a rebuilding Virginia Tech, they're North Carolina and Duke, which are middling teams.
You are forgetting national champion Clemson and
Clemson has
Florida
been
State.
good. But if you look at the Big 12, if you look at the SEC, they do not match up. They just don't. And I'm not even talking about the top teams, because the top teams you could actually make an argument. Clemson is a good
The
team.
bottom teams in the SEC are horrible.
The bottom teams in the SEC tend to be horrible. The middle teams in the SEC are better than the middle teams in the ACC. That's just my thought.
Okay.
Now, that being said, there's absolutely no excuse for how bad Kentucky is at football in the SEC.
They've had losing seasons 6 of the last 7 years.
And really, it could have been more.
It could have been more. And Louisville has dominated the football series, although they managed to lose it last year.
With a Heisman Trophy winner, which
Yes.
I still don't get.
Well, Louisville was coming into that game riding high. They're ranked like 3rd or 4th in the nation or something like that.
But they had a
And
chance. They had a chance to sneak into the conversation
They did.
for the playoffs in the end. And they didn't.
then it was, I think it was clearly a situation where they went into that game thinking, these people can't beat us. And anytime you go into a game like that, bad things are going to happen to you.
Yeah, and I agree with that. The thing that I look at with Kentucky, as we're talking about that football at the FBS level,
Yes.
Kentucky has the better.
They
I would
have
say
great
better
fan
resources.
support.
Great fan. Well, they have to be. Any fans that support a team that don't win games very often, the fan support has to be awesome.
One thing that astounded me here a couple of years ago, I was looking at the numbers. Louisville made more money on basketball than Kentucky did. Kentucky made more money on football than
Absolutely,
Louisville did, even though the perception of which team is better in those sports is just the opposite.
And I would say that some of that's probably accounting, little tricks you'd use to account for certain things. But I look at what the University of Kentucky has done under Stoops. Stoops is a good coach. I like him. I like how he reminds me. His positives remind me a lot of what Brooks did.
Well,
Rich Brooks did.
I would like for Kentucky to bring back Joker Phillips.
Well, of course you would. Louisville beat them every year. Then no. The thing with Rich Brooks, the trick with Kentucky is, oftentimes you get a coach who probably isn't ready to compete in the SEC. Stoops and Brooks have been the exception, and I think you're starting to see some of the increased success that comes with having a coach that's prepared to kind of coach at that level.
I think Stoops, though, is at a point where if he doesn't break through and have a big year, he may get fired. You give him a losing season this year and a losing season next year, and he could be gone.
I think he's a couple years away from that. I will put it to you like this. I think last year ran the gamut for fan support of the Stoops regime at Kentucky. The loss early on to Southern Miss was bad. Really bad. Like, horribly bad. Kentucky's margin for error to get into a bowl is razor thin. You got to win every game out of conference and then hope that you can steal a couple games in the SEC. That's just how it works every year for Kentucky football. You got to get to 6 wins. You're probably not going to win 6 games in the SEC, so you better figure out, okay, how do we win 3 games in the SEC? How do we win maybe 4 games in the SEC? And when you lose out of conference, you're behind the 8 ball. What was encouraging was watching the team develop and go from a team that was really dysfunctional and not very good early in the season to a team that beat Mississippi State in a close game, and then beat Louisville at the end of the year. Those are two huge wins. Those are the kind of games you have to have if you want to be successful at Kentucky.
Now, the up-and-coming program, unfortunately, is Western Kentucky. And I remember, gosh, what was it, 10 years ago when they went FBS?
Yeah.
A lot of Murray State fans talked to me about how that was a horrible mistake on their part.
Right.
But they've made money doing it. They've beat Kentucky twice. And, well, they made money doing it. Every time they go and play at an FBS school, they get $1 million.
That's great. They lose money on that program.
No, they don't.
Every single program below the top 3 conferences loses money on football. That's just the rule. That's how it is. That's why they have their students paying an athletics fee of $500 to $800 per student to help pay for that. That's why they had to get the Houshins people pay for their stuff. Anyway, they're losing.
I saw a preseason poll,
but they are winning games. So if you're okay with that,
I saw a preseason poll that has, and this is insane to me.
Yeah.
And I guess I need to do more research. That has Western Kentucky ranked in the top 25 to start this season.
I think that's a little high, but they have been very successful. What is impressive to me that Western has done is they've had the ability to be successful not with one coach, but through multiple coaches. They've had their coaches hired away from them. The thing that makes Murray State basketball so impressive is their ability to be successful no matter who's coaching.
Right.
You're seeing the beginnings of that at
with
Western
Kentucky football.
Western Kentucky football, let's face it, was Harbaugh. Harbaugh was their coach. He was the coach forever, and he was a successful coach.
And by the way, for anybody who's never met Jack Harbaugh, he is just a great guy.
Oh, I have no doubt. I have no doubts whatsoever. And what's funny is a brilliant football mind. One of the most brilliant football minds to ever grace the state of Kentucky in the coaching ranks. And that's knowing that Bear Bryant was at Kentucky, that you have all these guys in the history. He's got to be mentioned as one of those great coaches. But they've been successful even after he's gone. And that's what's most impressive about what Western's done in football.
Now you get to the 1AA level. And they don't call it that anymore. It's FCS.
FCS, yeah.
FCS level. And you've got Eastern Kentucky, which is a traditional power in that division, that has aspirations to go FBS. And they've been horrible over the last 3 or 4 years.
Absolutely.
Murray State beat them last year, and they just have not been a sound program for 3 to 4 years at least.
Yeah, and they're showing exactly what I was talking about with Western overperforming in spite of coaching changes. I think you're seeing Eastern Kentucky underperforming because of coaching changes. This is a proud program. They've got a national championship at the FCS level. They're very good, and another team that had a legendary coach for a long period of time in Roy Kidd. One of the best coaches in the state of Kentucky, fantastic coach. I'll never forget beating Roy Kidd's Eastern Kentucky team as a Murray State fan, watching Murray State do it at Stewart Stadium with Houston Nutt. And I mean, just a fantastic game because, frankly, you didn't beat Roy Kidd very often. Nobody did.
A Roy Kidd anecdote. When Joe Panunzio was the head coach at Murray State, he decided one year that he was going to coach quarterbacks because he had been a quarterback in college.
Yeah.
And so he was telling me that he's talking to Coach Kidd and told Coach Kidd that he was going to coach the quarterbacks this year. And he said Coach Kidd laughed and said, well, that's good to hear because I know you'll screw that up. They had a good relationship. Obviously, they could kid each other. And that does bring us to Murray State football. And Murray State has tradition in football. They've had legendary coaches in Mike Gottfried,
Frank Beamer,
yep. Houston Nutt.
Yep.
And Murray State was nationally relevant in football in the late 70s, early 80s. They were nationally
They were
relevant.
national semifinalists at that point.
They were nationally relevant under Houston Nutt.
Absolutely. Top 5, top 10 rankings. Yeah.
But somehow we've gotten to a point where they've had one winning season in the last 13 or 14 years.
Yeah.
And there are those who question whether Murray State should continue with football.
Yeah, and I think that's a question you have to ask, but at the same time, I'll put it to you like this. The issue that is facing Murray State football is not it's not a talent level across the first 11 on either side of the ball. Generally speaking, those guys are good. There's just no depth. They've never been able to build that depth of, okay, the second string guys can come in and we'll be okay. You just don't see that. Now, you see it at the top FCS programs. Jacksonville State's second string guys are fantastic. Heck, even UT Martin has developed depth in their program. EIU, fantastic depth all the time. The upperclassmen are the ones getting all the highlights, but the lowerclassmen coming in are able to do it. And I think that's been the issue. They've had momentary flashes of success. They've won games they probably shouldn't have because they were able to stay. Okay, yeah, it's early in the year. We don't have any injuries. We're able to keep our 11 guys on there. We're pretty good with those 11 guys. We can do some things. Last year, you talk about a team that, I think they beat EIU. I mean, there's just a lot that goes into that is, okay, we have talent, but, and I think that's the biggest issue. I think that's the issue that's going to hold them back. They've got to develop that ability to have 2 or 3 quality guys at every position, because injuries happen. Fatigue happens. All of these things you have to be able to do. You cannot assume that you're going to go through a season without a starter getting injured. And so you have to have guys who can fill in and take that next step. That said, I like what I've seen in the recruiting classes the past few years. There's a lot of talent. Now, is it enough talent? I don't know. Got to develop guys. I don't know. But this year you've got, Murray State has lost Katie Humphreys, who was a prolific quarterback for them, one of the better quarterbacks in FCS football, certainly one of the better quarterbacks in the OVC. They've lost him. You expect them to kind of take a half step back, although they've got a lot of talent in the running game and a lot of talent in the receivers. When there's a quarterback question, the offense kind of gets weak. You kind of have to question that. On the defensive side, this might be the best defensive team on paper that Murray State's had in 12 or 13 years. Maybe longer, maybe 20 years. There's talent on the defensive side, and there's a little bit of depth on the defensive side. But can they score points? Can they consistently stop people? Can they win 20 to 13 games instead of what they have had to win in the past, which is 35-28 games or 42-35 or 54-51?
Well, it's difficult to know what to expect. On
Agreed.
the one hand, if you look at this team, last year with, I believe, 47 freshmen, they managed to beat both Easterns.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, I believe they were 4-4 in the OVC.
Yeah.
And approached 500.
Yeah.
Did not reach it, but approached 500. Okay. You can look at that and say, all right, with that many freshmen last year, they should be able to take a step forward.
Right.
And this year, they ought to be among the contenders for the OVC championship.
Right. Maybe not in the top tier of contenders, but in that second group that nobody wants to play.
However, you look at the preseason computer ratings, and they're predicting 3-8.
Yeah, the problem with computer ratings is it's all speculative until they start playing games. Now, once the games start happening, there's data that you can extrapolate from, and I think
the data they use at the beginning is always based on the previous season,
which would always look bad if your starting quarterback leaves, or you lose your top receiver, or you know what I mean.
Well, no.
Because those
But-
players won't be coming back. You're not going to put Katie Humphries' stats in and say, well, Katie Humphries will be coming back next year. They've got to make some adjustments, don't they? Otherwise, the computer rankings are absolutely not worth looking at until the 4th or 5th.
Well, I don't know for certain how they do it, but I don't think they take those things into account at the beginning of the season. I think it's just basically based on their rating at the end of the previous season.
Well, then I'd throw those numbers out. Now, we might see those numbers bear out, but I think it would be more speculative at this point. I think the biggest issue that Murray State faces on a consistent basis is bringing in and developing nationally relevant players. One thing that has held Murray back in the past is the level of high school athlete in the region. Now, that's not the case down in Jacksonville, Alabama. And it's not even the case out in Lexington, Cincinnati, where EKU is, or even in central Illinois, where Eastern Illinois is. You have to have a base of Division I athletes. Now, 25 years ago, I don't think there were a lot of Division I athletes coming out for football from this area. I think that's changed. I think what you're seeing is more players are coming out of the high school ranks from this region that are borderline college players. They're guys you're like, well, yeah, that guy could play football in college. And even more that you're saying, oh yeah, that guy could definitely play at the next level. And I think we're seeing that with, a few years ago it was Lone Oak and Callaway who had their big rivalry in 4A. I think you've seen it in 2A in Mayfield, 3A in Paducah Tillman, but I think you're also seeing it in Caldwell County, Crittenden County in the past, even Trigg County in the past. You're seeing these players tend to develop, and you're seeing more of them start to pop up as being Division I athletes. Even in the hunt for Mr. Football. I remember when Pookie Jones got Mr. Football in the state of Kentucky in 1993, or 89. At any rate, when he won Mr. Football, it was a huge deal because it was a Mr. Football from Western Kentucky that wasn't at Mayfield or Paducah Tillman.
Right.
40 years ago, if you didn't go to Mayfield or Tillman and maybe sometimes Murray, you really, you weren't going to get looked at. When he was successful at Callaway and then later went on to UK and led them to a Peach Bowl.
And then decided to play baseball.
And honestly, I don't really blame him. They would have made him, he had to have been a wide receiver in the pros. He wasn't going to be an option quarterback.
His brother, of course, played at Louisville. Fred.
Right, Fred. And both of those guys, fantastic athletes.
Outstanding, indeed.
Just amazing athletes. But I think that's the biggest issue is we're seeing now that they're starting to develop a high school culture of developing Division I players. Maybe that helps Murray State if they're able to capture and develop those guys.
Joe Stonecipher told me a story about when Alan Williams signed with the University of Louisville. Alan was a player at Callaway, and Howard Schnellenberger flew in on a helicopter for the signing.
Howard Schnellenberger, if nothing else, he knew how to make an entrance. That's a man who understood the dramatics of what he was doing.
I have a couple of Howard Schnellenberger stories for you.
I'm sure you do. It seems like everybody has a Howard Schnellenberger. Howard Schnellenberger, of course, a graduate of the University of Kentucky, is actually in their Ring of Honor,
yes.
Which is kind of telling. So this is a man who's steeped in Kentucky football.
Transformed 3 programs.
Absolutely.
Transformed Miami
Yep.
into a national championship contender.
And there's a 30 for 30 about that.
Transformed the University of Louisville. And then he goes to Florida Atlantic, starts a program there, and gets them into a bowl game before he leaves. And unless at the very, very end of his career he managed to lose a bowl game, he's undefeated in bowl games.
Yeah, fantastic.
You don't find many coaches that are undefeated in bowl games.
Fantastic
Anyway.
coach. Yeah, fantastic coach.
Anyway, 2 stories. One, when Browning Nagel was the quarterback, there was a game where
it's a name I haven't heard in a while.
Browning Nagel was having a horrible game, and I was watching
Really?
it. And I was screaming, "Put Jeff Brom in! Put Jeff Brom in!" And Howard left Browning Nagel in, and Browning bounced back, had a great game, as it turned out, and World War I. So I was talking to Howard on his call-in show, and I said, I told him about that, and I said, clearly you know more about football than I do. And he said, in modest fashion, well, I get to see them practice every day.
And it's funny to hear stuff like that. So the best Howard Schnellenberger story.
Let me tell
you
my
got
other
one more. Go for it.
All right. One year they were going to a bowl game, and it's the last coach's show before the bowl game. And so they're interviewing him. What are you going to do with the players? He said, I'll give them some time off, give them a chance to go see their girlfriend or their boyfriend.
Whatever. It doesn't matter. No, so one of the best anecdotes, and this was in the 30 for 30, and talking about the U. It was the U part 1, talking about how Schnellenberger developed his recruiting concept. And he drew the line across the south tip of Florida and said, this is the state of Miami. Nobody leaves the state of Miami. Now, that was pretty audacious at the time. For a no history team like Miami over in Coral Gables or wherever they're at, and it's how are you going to do that? It's a private school. How are you going to do that? And the stories that come out about Schnellenberger are that he would walk into the worst neighborhoods in Florida, just park his car out front like he lived there, and go and knock on the kid's door. And what happened was people would know his car, and nobody would mess with him. He was free to enter. Nobody would, none of the gangs or there would be no problems for this guy. And what he would do, of course, he smoked a pipe.
Yes.
And was known for smoking a pipe. Everybody knew that he smoked a pipe. So what he would do if he really wanted a recruit is, well, he'd go and visit them and shake their hand and talk to their folks and tell them about his vision for them and so on. So standard recruiting. And he'd get up to leave and he'd shake hands and he would leave his pipe. That way he knew they'd have to call him back. So it was one of those situations where a kid would go, oh man, he came over to my house, he forgot his pipe. Unbeknownst to the kid is Howard Schnellenberger left his pipe everywhere. He had hundreds of pipes and he would just leave them in these recruits' homes because he wanted them to be in contact. He knew if he could talk to them, he could get them to Miami. And I believe that was still the case when he was at Louisville. If I could just talk to these guys, I could get them to come to Louisville and we'll build a program. Fantastic. One of those guys that if you were going to build a pantheon of college football out of the state of Kentucky, Howard Schnellenberger's got to be up there.
Absolutely.
He just has to be.
Absolutely. If you did a football Mount Rushmore for the state of Kentucky, okay, I think these guys have to be on it.
Okay.
Paul Hornung, Howard Schnellenberger, Johnny Unitas, and I don't know who's number 4.
Well, I look at it a little differently.
Okay.
When I look at what those guys have to do, for me to put them on that, I think Schnellenberger's automatically on there.
Okay.
And I think the reason being, not only was he one of the best coaches of his generation, he was also one of the better players of his generation.
Yes.
So that puts you up on the pedestal. I would not go with Hornung.
Heisman Trophy winner.
Heisman Trophy winner out of Louisville. Very famous, went to Notre Dame, the Golden Boy, played for the Packers and won, Super Bowls. But did not have the lifelong impact that a Schnellenberger had.
Okay.
I think, honestly, you look at a guy like Roy Kidd. You look at a guy like Jack Harbaugh.
I'll say no to Jack Harbaugh. I don't know about Roy Kidd.
The reason why I say that, if you're looking at impact on football based in Kentucky, what Harbaugh did at Western and what he did developing coaches and players even, I mean, his sons and his nephews have all become professional coaches on that same tree. They all assisted it. He was the guy who taught them how to be a coach. And as such, I think that pushes him up into that next level. Guys like Bear Bryant, I don't think make the list.
I agree.
He wasn't there long enough. Wasn't
I
able to
agree.
do the things he needed to do. I put Roy Kidd in there. Again, national
Well, I
relevance.
could go with
Okay.
Schnellenberger, Horning, Unitas, and Roy Kidd.
Unitas might do it, but I still can't give Horning. I totally understand Unitas. Johnny U was possibly the greatest quarterback with any ties to the state of Kentucky. And that's, better than Phil Simms, it's just
Yeah.
how that works. I could probably go with Unitas. There's a lot of guys who were good football players that have come out of the state of Kentucky who, haven't done anything at that next level. I'm looking for Hall of Fame top to bottom. I don't know who my fourth would be.
How about Tom Jackson?
Not a bad call. George
His
Blanda.
ESPN career on top of his playing career.
I think you could look at a Blanda, George Blanda, longest playing career in professional football
but he's
history.
a kicker primarily in the pros.
He was a quarterback. He has the most points scored. He was an All-American quarterback kicker
Kickers
at
don't
Kentucky.
count.
Kickers totally count.
They
Old
just
school
they
guy.
don't count.
I would challenge you to find a player who was as useful for as long as Blanda. This is a guy who is immortalized by the Raiders. This guy's in their Ring of Honor. He played under, Bear Bryant. He was an amazing player and went on to play.
If you want to replace Roy Kidd with George Blanda, I'll give you that.
I'm going to put George Blanda over Paul Horning.
That's crazy.
Why not? He won Super Bowls the same as Horning. The only thing he didn't do was win a Heisman Trophy. And you know what? I'd still take Blanda over Paul Horning.
That's just crazy. And you're only saying that because Horning didn't play college football in the state of Kentucky.
No. He went to Notre Dame and was losing at Notre Dame. That's what he did. So let's talk about that whole thing. Yes, he went and played and he was a Heisman Trophy winner at Notre Dame. His team went 4-8 the year he won the Heisman Trophy.
I don't think so.
I'm going to look it up. Okay, so what else we got for football in the state of Kentucky?
Well, not much. I mean, at the NAIA level, Georgetown is consistently very good, near the top of the NAIA rankings. Moorhead plays non-scholarship football. Who cares?
They were 2-8 the year he won the Heisman Trophy.
I knew they weren't 4-8 because they didn't play 12 games back then.
You're right, but he still had a losing record, and it wasn't close.
Might I say, I don't care. When it comes to high school football in the state of Kentucky, I mean, at the top you've got St. X and Trinity, and everybody else takes a back seat to those two schools. Perhaps that shouldn't be surprising.
Yeah,
because they are boys' schools,
right?
And so,
Right.
and they're 6A schools, so they have like 1,500 kids, and they're
there's a
boys'
level of
schools, so it's
recruiting
1,500
ability.
boys.
Right. Whenever you're a private school in Kentucky, one of the things that we look at in this area, and what I've looked at, is the separation of public and private schools at the high school level in the state of Kentucky versus other states. In Tennessee, private schools are separated into their own division.
Right.
And I think that's the right call. Because what you have is the ability to offer scholarships to athletes at the high school level. Callaway County cannot do that. Murray High cannot do that. Paducah-Tillman, Graves County, Mayfield, they can't do that. So when you're looking at St. X or Trinity or Male or whatever these schools have been in the past, where they have the ability and the funds to say, hey, we know that you're not close to here, but we'll offer you free tuition to come and play on our football team. And it does happen.
As far as tradition, the Male Manual game was always a huge game in the city of Louisville.
Yeah.
My mother graduated from Male. She always wanted to go to that game. And they used to draw 20,000 people to that football game. And
Absolutely.
It was, back in the day, played in the University of Louisville Stadium. I don't know where it's played at today. around Western Kentucky, Mayfield probably has as good a reputation as anybody. McCracken County probably fields the best team now year in and year out, just because of the size of the school.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Callaway has had some very good teams at times. I remember the team Coach McKeel led to the semifinals of the state playoffs.
Fantastic team.
It was an outstanding team. Casey Brockman, the top passer in school history. They had the top 2 receivers in school history, Chris Dobbins and George Garner. And then they had the top rusher in school history in Tyrell Willis.
Yep.
And Murray High's had some great teams as well.
Absolutely. You're talking about, whenever you're talking about success over in this part of the state with football, you kind of default to Mayfield versus Tillman. That's been the old school rivalry that's been played forever. It seems like one of the oldest rivalries in the country in high school football. But I think you're absolutely right. I think if you're looking at that Callaway team that did make it to the semifinals of the state, amazing team. And what's more amazing and what's really a testament to that team was the lack of size on the lines. Generally speaking, if you're talking about a football team that's successful at any level, you've got a line that is big and dominant and is able to play at a high level and is, full of D1 athletes that are ready to play and, push their guys around. That Callaway team didn't have that. They didn't have big guys on the line. The biggest guy on the team was the running back, Tyrell Willis. Now, what they did and made up for that was they had tenacious blockers on the line, guys who got every bit of their ability. They would ring it out on the field. And not only that, they were smart. And then that's where I see Casey Brockman being one of the best high school quarterbacks in the state of Kentucky, was it wasn't just that he could throw the football. The man had pocket awareness that was far beyond his years. He knew how to take a step up, take a step left, take a step right, just buy himself an extra second for that receiver to come open.
Best Murray High team.
Oh, man. I think as it comes to best, I think you'd go back to the Ty Holland years or, some of those guys that were those early championship years. The year they lost to Beechwood in the state championship was, I would say, the best Murray High team I'd ever seen, top to bottom. I think that was 94 maybe.
Remember any of the players on that team?
God, no.
Okay.
I just remember watching, and I was a young kid, but I remember watching that team and not seeing a glaring weakness.
Right.
And that doesn't happen on a single A football team. They were single A back in the day. That just doesn't happen at that level. Normally you're like, okay, yeah, they're a fantastic running game, but they can't throw. Or they're great on defense, but their offense is only okay. That wasn't the case with that team. That was one of the best football teams I'd ever seen come out of this into the state. They were fantastic. And to lose like they did, of course, kind of makes it all come around. And we'll talk about the Beechwood loss one of these days. We might bring in a Murray High graduate and talk about that. But that was pretty devastating.
But for now, that brings to a close this edition of the Improbability Engine.